Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our class, Humanities 1, Creative Minds. So last class, as we were trying to get to know our course a little better, we looked at the humanities and what that refers to. And today we'll look a little bit closer to what this term creativity means. So when you think of creativity, or when I say the word, what comes to your mind? Do you see images or hear certain sounds? Do you think of certain words like imagination or unique or different or new? Does the phrase out of the box come to mind? Does being different or original come to mind? How about the idea of change or transformation? Those are all terms also associated with being creative. How about people? Do any sorts of people come to mind? Maybe you think about Albert Einstein or scientists that have come up with other revolutionary ideas. Maybe you think of your favorite visual artist or painters. Maybe you think about people that have created social change in the world, folks like Martin Luther King. Maybe you think of people who've created vast amounts of wealth and created huge, successful companies and businesses. Who comes to your mind? And then what I'd like you to think about is yourself. Do you consider yourself to be creative? Now, obviously, in order to answer that question, we have to define what we mean by creative. So what we'll do next is I'll show you various examples of things people often go, hey, look, that's creative. And I want you to do your best to describe why. What is it about what you'll be seeing and hearing that makes it creative? Now, obviously, there's no right answer to this, nor is there any wrong answer. But as you go through, and we can go from image to image and go to certain videos, ask yourself, those terms, those words, those people that came to my mind, how might that be related to what I'm seeing in front of me? Okay? So just do your best to describe why somebody would go, hey, that is darn creative. Okay? So let's move me to the other side of the page. So here we are. We'll be describing creativity. So the first thing we'll take a look at comes from visual artist M.C. Escher. Take a look at this. What is it that first jumps out at you? What is it that strikes you as being something that reminds you of one of those terms or people that you thought about earlier? Is there anything here that's unique or imaginative or different or new? And then go ahead and write that in. Here is another work by M.C. Escher. Why would somebody say this is an example of creativity? Here's something you may want to think about. What is the object of the art? What is it that the artist is showing us? And how are they doing it? Here is another piece of visual art from Salvador Dali, famous Spanish visual artist. What's the first thing or things that jump out at you, that strike you as being particularly creative? Here is a piece by Picasso. Why would somebody look at this and say to themselves that this is a prime example of a creative artist? Some questions to think about are, what is it that Picasso is showing us here? And how is he showing it to us? Here we have a page from Leonardo da Vinci's famous notebook. So Leonardo da Vinci was a man who had his hands in lots of different endeavors. He was an inventor and a scientist and a mathematician and an artist. He was interested in all sorts of fields. Here we see something, looks like some sort of weaponry. Why is this considered creative? Now, the Leonardo da Vinci would walk around with a gigantic notebook, and as he came up with ideas, he would jot them down and sketch them down, and this is a page from that notebook, and here is another page from that notebook. What makes this creative? Take a look at the date, the time period in which Da Vinci was alive. Think about the world he was in and what they believed, what they thought. How is this sketch different? How is this sketch creative? In a similar way, we see another page of his notebook show us this image. What do you think Da Vinci was trying to do here? How is this a little bit different than what we saw on the previous page? This is Ella Fitzgerald. If you're not familiar with Ella Fitzgerald, you should be. She is the preeminent jazz female vocalist. In fact, she might be the most famous jazz vocalist, period, regardless of gender. If you are a fan of any sort of vocal excellence in pop music, where you hear these vocalists do gymnastics with their voice and demonstrate how excellent they are at using that natural instrument that they have, well, a lot of that can be traced back to influence by Ella Fitzgerald. So to understand why Ella Fitzgerald is creative, I will play you a song that was recorded by this person, Frank Sinatra. Now, Frank was a famous vocalist back in his day. In fact, maybe the very first famous pop vocalist, in terms of popular music back in the 50s and 60s. And he will be singing a song written by Antonio Carlos Jobim called One Note Samba. Now notice the album cover that's on the screen. You see that Sinatra is holding sheet music, so he's reading off of the music that was written by Jobim, and it looks like they probably recorded this in a very controlled recording studio. And then as you listen to Frank sing the song, try to get a sense for what it sounds like, the melody, the lyrics. And then what we'll do is we'll play for you Ella's version in comparison. Okay, so first let's listen to Frank Sinatra's version.
This is just a little samba built upon a single note. Other notes are bound to follow, but the root is still that note. Now this new one is the consequence of the one we've just been through, as I'm bound to be the unavoidable consequence of you. There's so many people who can talk and talk and talk and just say nothing, or nearly nothing. I have used up all the scale I know, and at the end I've come to nothing, or nearly nothing. So I come back to my first note, as I must come back to you. I will pour into that one note all the love I feel for you. Anyone who wants the whole show, re mi fa sol la si do, he will find himself with no show. Better play the note you know.
Okay, so now we're going to take a look at Ella Fitzgerald's version of the exact same song. Why, after listening to this, do people go, wow, she was extremely creative? Let's take a listen.
Thank you so much. I have listened to so much beautiful jazz, and we thought that maybe some of the things we did were a little different, but they were a little jazzy in a way. So we'd like to just do a little impromptu thing, and thought maybe this would fit in with the theme. Okay? You know. Or would you rather do the blues? Do the blues? Huh? Oh, you don't know the blues? Okay. All right. Shung ding ding boom boom bing ding 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 ah. Shung ding ding boom boom ding 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 ah. Boom ding 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 la. You done the baby didn't bum done the dip didn't bim ba. Shung ding 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 be you done the dope didn't do little bum. How little la. Shub dee big dip done love do da. Bum 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 done the bend the little da. Shub dee little do da. Bit da. Shub dee
Next, we'll take a look at a video clip from a MTV television show called America's Best Dance Crew, where different dance crews competed against one another. This was the winning dance routine from one of the seasons. And as you watch it, ask yourself, well, why would somebody watch this routine and say, wow, that was incredibly creative?
Being able to make your own music completes the task of being on the show.
Did you have any ideas of what you're thinking about?
Actually, Ryan plays piano. Hey, can I get a beat with this?
Oh, that's nasty, man. Listening to Ryan jamming on the piano, we realized we really have to make it work on stage.
Yeah, that's dope.
This is the number that really matters, so we are going to do our part by laying our heart on that stage.
Out of everything I've ever wanted to win, this is the one thing that I want to win with my friends, my best friends.
I love you guys! Can Quest hit all the right notes and come out on top of the dance world in their last chance to hook the voters at home with their original performance called Orchestra? Here's Quest Crew.
And lastly, we're going to take a look at clips of professional NBA players. That's the National Basketball Association. If you remember taking PE or being part of elementary school or junior high or high school basketball team, remember what they taught you about how to play the game, especially about how to pass the ball. As we watch these clips of basketball players, why is it that when people watch these players do things like what you're about to see, During a game, they jump out of their seats and clap their hands, and they're amazed by how creative these people are. Okay, let's take a look.
Scam, never was a quitter, tasted like a raindrop. Yeah! Heavily bound, cause heaven's got a number when she's spinning me around. Kissing is a color, her loving is a wild dog. She's got the look. 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 What's in the world can make a brown-eyed girl turn blue? When everything I'll ever do, I do for you. She's got the love. Hey. You in the eyes, make it to the T-bone as a lover's disguise. Banging on the head drum, shaking like a mad bull. She's got the love. Swinging to the band, moving like a hammer. She's a miracle man. Loving is the ocean, kissing is the wet sand. She's got the love. 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 What's in the world can make a brown-eyed girl turn blue? When everything I'll ever do, I do for you. And I go la 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 la. She's got the love. She's got the love.
So why are these things creative? Why are these examples of creativity? You know, for a lot of us, we say to ourselves, maybe we can spot it when we see it, but describing it might be a little bit more difficult. So from your textbook, here is one definition that is often used to describe what creativity refers to. Creativity is the ability to transcend traditional ideas, rules, patterns, relationships, or the like, and to create meaningful new ideas, forms, methods, interpretations, etc. Can you see how that can be applied to all the examples you just viewed? So for instance, here is one of Da Vinci's sketches again from his notebook, and hopefully you recognize this as some sort of flying device, right? Well, if you think back to Da Vinci's day, people transported themselves by foot, and if not by foot, by horse, and if not by horse, something else that was on the ground, right? Human beings moved from place to place through ground transportation. So there was this idea, this traditional idea, that if you wanted to go from point A to point B, the fastest way to do it has to be on the ground. The only way to do it is on the ground. So there we have this traditional idea, a traditional rule for how we're supposed to move, how we're supposed to transport ourselves. And Da Vinci transcended that idea. So transcend means to go beyond. He went beyond that idea and thought about something new, a new idea of how maybe we could fly, right? Maybe we could transport ourselves through the air, through wind. Can you see how this is applicable to all the other examples too? Let's take a look at another definition. In our class, this will be the definition we use most often. Now remember the story that you've been reading about in a textbook about these islanders and the island that they all live in. From their point of view, the island only consists of two things, pickles and donuts, which means their entire reality is this island of pickles and donuts. That's all that is real. So what does creativity mean for them? Well, creativity then means manifesting something beyond your ordinary world. And as we go through the course, we'll often use this terminology, that we are often stuck in an ordinary world, that in order to bring something new, we have to go beyond it. We have to venture out beyond our island of pickles and donuts. So in this sense, manifesting beyond your ordinary world refers bringing to life something beyond your ordinary beliefs, beyond your ordinary assumptions, beyond your ordinary habits and perceptions and approaches to things. Can you see how this definition can be applied to all the examples we looked at? I mean, when we took a look at paintings and other examples of visual art, the reason they would seem creative is because they went beyond what we think of as being ordinary. So in this case with Salvador Dali's painting, you may have noted how the clocks seem different than ordinary, right? When we think ordinarily of clocks, we think of them as being solid things that are often hung on walls or maybe attached to a wristband on our wrists. Here we see clocks that are malleable, right? We see clocks that are hanging off of trees and over what looks like, who knows, a desk or a table of some sort. And then we have to ask ourselves about the environment. Where is this? It's not so clear. And even that can be part of the creativity, right? Having a piece of art where it's not very clear what it is it's representing or what it's depicting. Is this a beach? Is this a cliff? And why would there be structures like this in either one of those? These look like furniture of some sort, right? Those all go beyond the ordinary world, how we ordinarily see, believe, think, perceive, etc. Our third definition is about conditioned stories. Creativity can be phrased as manifesting beyond your conditioned stories. Now, what does that mean? When we talk about beliefs, when we talk about traditional ideas, when we talk about ordinary perceptions, those are all things that form your story of how you think the world works. They are elements of your worldview. It's the narrative you grew up with. It's the narrative you've put together after being exposed to your culture, to your family, to your neighbors. You start to develop a story of how the world works. What's the right way to create music? What's the best way to study for an exam? What's the one way of being successful in life? They're all stories that you tell yourself, right? These are all stories that you've put together as a result of your experience in life. But in order to be creative, you have to go beyond those conditioned stories, those stories we've been conditioned to believe by our friends and our parents and our culture. So when we take a look at something like Ella Fitzgerald's demonstration of vocal prowess, I mean, she's singing a song. So what does that have to do with the story? Well, in one sense, she can be considered creative because she went beyond the story lots of people had about how that song should be sung. She went beyond the story most people had about what it means to be a good vocalist. Right? So an ordinary story could be something like, hey, a vocalist sings what's written on the sheet music that was written by a particular composer, right? A vocalist is supposed to sing in a way where the lyrics are of utmost importance and are sung clearly. Here, Ella Fitzgerald went beyond that story, right? Instead of focusing on clarity of her words, She treated her voice like an instrument, and it sounded like what you'd hear a trumpet do or a saxophone do when it's their time to solo. Instead of sticking to the strict written composition from the original composer, Ella created her own melody and her own rhythms on the spot in front of a live audience. These are all examples of how she went beyond the story that lots of people tell themselves about how to perform a song. Can you see how this can be applied to all the examples you've looked at? Notice here too that when we take a look at these different definitions of creativity, none of them are objective, right? Meaning we don't look at something and we go, okay, that is objectively creative. Because who determines what the ordinary world is? I mean, who determines what conditioned stories are or traditional rules or ideas are? I mean, that's all very subjective. So if you think something is creative because it goes beyond your ordinary idea, your ordinary understanding, your traditional concept of how something is, well, then that's creative to you, right? And that'll be our approach in our class. Can you see now how all of these are examples of these different ways of describing what creativity refers to? So as we mentioned, we'll be focused primarily on that second definition. We'll talk a lot about going beyond your ordinary world, and you'll see why as we talk about the creative process next time. So what is our class specifically about? Let's go ahead and move my face a little bit so that I'm not so much of a distraction to you guys. Well, with all these examples, we see people that have been able to come up with unique ideas and insights, right? How is it that some people are able to come up with a creative idea, that it just comes to them? They seem to be able to access lots of ideas. Turns out it's nothing mysterious. It's something that you can develop too. Maybe you've noticed, like Ella, some people that are great improvisers. They're able to come up with ideas on the spot, right, in the heat of the moment. Have you ever seen like a comedic improviser, how they're able to riff off members of their audience? And you might say to yourself, wow, that looks like magic. Well, it's not really magic. There are things you can do to cultivate that as a skill. But for me, one of the reasons I love teaching this class is because I like to emphasize how you can become the artist of your own life. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, an artist in front of a canvas, there's so many options and choices in what they can do with that blank canvas. And the same thing is true of your life, even though it doesn't always feel like that way, right? I mean, have you noticed some people are able to see opportunities and you don't see them in your own life? Or they're able to see possibilities and different avenues for them to walk through and go down that lead to really interesting places, and you don't really see those possibilities for yourself? How are some people able to create new inventions and start businesses and do amazing things with their lives? Well, I mean, those are things you could do too, right? It's all part of what it means to live a human life, is to create those possibilities for yourself. So, do you consider yourself to be creative? If you look back at your history, I bet you can find examples of this, right? But here's one thing I want you to remember as you're thinking about that question. Remember that there was one common trait, according to Harvard psychiatrist Albert Rothenberg. So Rothenberg did that study looking at various creative people, find out what they all had in common, and he found only one trait in common. The one common bond between all who think differently is their willingness to do so. So it's not about what they ate, it's not about their upbringing, it's not about their IQ, it's about their level of motivation. How badly they wanted to make something new. Doesn't that make sense? When we take a look at all of these examples, these are people that went beyond their ordinary worlds. These are people that, even though society and their culture was telling them how certain things are supposed to be, how you're supposed to transport yourself, how you're supposed to make good art, how you're supposed to make a good song if you're a vocalist, it takes a lot of effort to go beyond that, doesn't it? You need to be very motivated. And one of the main reasons for this is because being creative isn't just like a one-step thing. There's a process to being creative, right? Lots of us have interesting ideas for a business, but it doesn't make us creative, does it? Lots of us have interesting ideas for a new software program or how to make money, but the idea itself doesn't mean we're creative. Creative means you create. It means you have to manifest something, and that takes effort. That takes work. That takes motivation to continue on and not just be fired up when you first have the idea. So the majority of our class then will be focused on this process. How is it you get from your ordinary world, this world of traditional beliefs and ideas and assumptions about how to make a good story, about how to make a good song, about how to cook a good meal, about how to have a good family, about how to have a good life, what it is you should value. The ordinary world, how do you get from that place to something different? Where maybe you discover a new way of writing a song, a new way of creating music, a new way of making money, a new way of having a good relationship, and maybe something new that you're going to want to value. Maybe there's something different out there that you really enjoy or really want out of life that you haven't thought about. Well, how do we get from point A to point B? What's that process like? And how could we learn it? Well, that's what we'll talk about in our next module.